Hello. Good to see you. It feels very weird walking on stage without a viola. Normally when I walk on after an introduction, I'm supposed to have a viola, but I don't today. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a little bit more background on me and why I have any business talking to you about practicing. So as an undergraduate, I attended Oberlin College and Conservatory, where I double majored in viola and neuroscience, as you just heard, and the neuroscience was just for fun. People always laugh when I say that, but it's true. I just thought brains were fascinating, and I wanted to learn more about them. So I had no plans to go on with the neuroscience. I went to New England Conservatory for my master's degree. And when I got there, I really quickly learned that I missed neuroscience a lot, which is a problem if you're at a conservatory because you can't take anything except for music classes at a conservatory. So I was very fortunate that NEC allowed me to do a number of independent studies looking at aspects of music in the brain that I had gotten interested in at Oberlin. And so I essentially did my own thing at NEC, looking into these aspects of learning and how it applied to me as a violist. After I graduated from New England Conservatory, I went to Rice University, which is where I did my doctorate in viola, but I was back at a research institution, so I was able to take graduate level neuroscience classes pretty much the whole time I was there. I worked in a lab pretty much the whole time I was there. I did a whole bunch of stuff at Rice, which was really wonderful, bridging the gap between music and neuroscience. For the last 10 years, I've been a viola professor, first at a university in Wisconsin and most recently at the University of Arizona. But over the summer, last summer, I moved back to the Boston area and I now teach at New England Conservatory, teaching classes on the science of practicing, working one-on-one with students and faculty on applying this area of research that I have made my specialty. So today, before we get started, I would like to see with a show of hands how many of you play an instrument or sing. Wow, okay, everybody, fantastic. Okay, that is wonderful. So everything I'm going to share with you today applies to everything you do when you're trying to learn music. It also applies to anything you want to learn that's not music. So any of you that do anything having to do with athletics, or if you're trying to get better at chess, or if you're trying to get better at painting or writing or whatever, it applies to all of it. When I talk about my work, I like to share the science and then give you practical tips on what does this actually look like for you practicing an instrument. So that's how I'll talk about it today, but like I said, you can apply it to whatever you want. All right, so I have to go forward in two places, so I have to remember to do things right today. So here are the topics we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the power of breaks. We're going to talk about something called random practice. You'll see that that is related to what we talk about breaks. And then we're going to finish with a bit about mental practice. I picked these topics today because all three of these were the most powerful for me personally as a musician. I've seen how powerful they've been for my students, and they're the things most people have not heard about before. So hopefully I will share some new information that's interesting for you today. So before I start sharing information, I have more questions for you. So here's the first question. True or false? It's best to set aside a large block of time, an hour or more, to practice each day. So raise your hand if you think this is true. Raise your hand if you think it's false. Raise your hand if you're not sure. Actually, I should have put that on the slide. Okay, some not sures. I have 4 questions for you. I'm not sure is always a valid response. Okay, next question. True or false? It's best to pick one thing to focus on and work on that until you've mastered it before moving on to something else. And I'll give you the answers at the end. So raise your hand for true for this one. Raise your hand for false for this one. Raise your hand for I don't know. Okay, great. Next question. Which is better, practicing for an hour without a break or taking a break every 5 to 10 minutes? So raise your hand for an hour without a break. Raise your hand for a break every 5 to 10 minutes. Raise your hand for I'm not sure. Okay, last question before you get some answers. Which is better, practicing for 10 minutes each day or 60 to 70 minutes once a week? So raise your hand for 10 minutes each day. Okay, more people agree together on this one. All right, raise your hand for 60 to 70 minutes once a week. Raise your hand for I'm not sure. Okay, ready for some answers? Yes, all right. This one is false. So it is not best to set aside a large block of time, an hour or more, to practice each day. We'll talk about why. This one is also false. It's not best to pick one thing, focus on that, and work on it till you've mastered it before moving on to something else. We will also talk about why. This one, it's definitely much better to take a break every 5 to 10 minutes than to practice for an hour without a break. And then for this one, I think everybody agreed on this one. Better to practice 10 minutes each day than 60 to 70 minutes once a week. So now we should get into why these are the answers. So I think that in our culture in general, but especially music training culture, there's the idea that we should practice like this guy as much as possible, all the time, all the time, all the time. Just do as much as you possibly can. That's the ideal. Any students that go to conservatory think that they should be practicing 6 to 8 hours a day, as much as humanly possible, not sleeping, just like living in the practice room and practicing all the time. But actually, what research shows is that we'll make a lot more progress if we sit on the couch with our cat every once in a while and take a break. Before we get into this research, I should also say that the research I'm about to discuss with you goes back to the 1880s. We've known for a very long time that taking a break, like this person is on their couch, taking a break is not only really important for learning, it's absolutely critical for learning, and we make the most progress during breaks, which I know is the most counterintuitive thing you've ever heard. This has not made it into our culture, but this research is very, very old. So I'm going to start with 2 studies that were done on surgical students, medical students who were learning to be surgeons. Both of these studies had the same design. So they took the surgical students and they broke them into 2 groups. One group had a series of training modules all back to back in one day. So let's say on a Monday, they just did one training module back to back. The other group did one training module per week. So they would do one training module every Monday, let's say, until they had done all of their training. Everybody understand the different groups? Okay. So the group that did their training all on one day, that was called the massed group, M-A-S-S-E-D, because they did all their training in a mass. The group that did one training module per week is called the spaced group, because their training was spaced out. In this first study that I'm going to share with you, they were looking at the percentage of students in each group who reached proficiency at the various skills they were working on. Here are the numbers. So in the first column, that's the percentage of students who reached proficiency in the massed group. Again, that's the group that did all their training all in one day. In the second column, the percentage of students who reached, oh my, you can't see my mouse. Aha, okay, because I'm not connected to what's projecting there. So in the second column where it says spaced group, that's the percentage of students who reached proficiency in the group that did one training module per week. You can see how different these numbers are, right? 39% versus 90%, 11% versus 70%, that's very, very different. Far more students reached proficiency in the group that basically had a week break in between their training. And again, they had exactly the same training. They had exactly the same amount of training. All that was different was the schedule of training. And you can see how different the results are. So that's one study of many that finds essentially this result, that when you take breaks as part of practicing, as part of learning, more people in the group reach proficiency and you reach a higher level. The second study that I want to share with you had the same exact design. So massed group did all their training all in one day. Spaced group, it was once a week. This second study is looking at the transfer of skills. So all of the surgeons learned their skills in a skills lab, and then they had to transfer those skills to a more real-world situation. And they were looking at, okay, well, how well do the skills transfer? So here's what they found, and I can't point at that screen, so I'm going to have to just describe it to you. So what the white boxes are showing the spaced group, the group that had 1 week break in between each of their training modules. The gray boxes are showing the massed group, the group that had all their training all in one day. Each pair of graphs shows their score on a pretest before they did any training whatsoever, and then their score on a transfer test where they had to transfer their training to a more real-world situation. I want to draw your attention to, in the upper left-hand corner where it says global ratings. Does everybody see that? Everybody see where that is? If you look at the gray boxes, you can see that there is no difference between the pre-test and the transfer test. Can everybody see that? That the gray boxes are at exactly the same place in the graph? That means that the group that did not take breaks as part of their training learned nothing that they were able to transfer to the more real-world situation, because they did just as poorly on the transfer test as on the pre-test before they learned anything at all. Whereas if you look at the white boxes, you can see that in the transfer part of the graph, in that global ratings up there, it's much higher up on the graph, meaning they did better. Everybody see that? I want to draw your attention now to the lower right-hand corner where it says competency. Everybody see that one? So that's their competency score. And again, the gray boxes, there is no difference between the pre-test and the transfer test. So they didn't learn anything that they were able to transfer in the group that didn't take breaks, whereas again, the white boxes, you can see it's higher up on the transfer part of the test. So they learned something, and they did better, which is what you would hope after all that training. Everybody understand those graphs and what you see there? So I think that this is especially relevant to us as musicians, because my guess is all of you that play instruments or sing, you practice scales, and you practice etudes, and you practice technical studies, right? You practice things outside of your repertoire. And the reason why we do that as musicians, that we practice technical fundamentals, is because we hope the skills that we learn through playing scales or arpeggios or etudes, we hope those skills will transfer to our music. Right? And when we learn a piece of music and we learn new skills in that music, we hope it will transfer to other pieces of music, that we don't have to start from scratch every time. And what the research on taking breaks has shown is that when you take breaks as part of your practicing, that transfer takes place much more easily. So you don't have to kind of start from scratch each time, that it transfers much better. So again, this is just one study of many that finds the same thing. One more study that I want to share with you. This one was not done on surgeons. It was done on everyday people learning a button press sequence on a computer keyboard that they had to practice as quickly and accurately as they could. They got 10 seconds to practice this sequence, and then they'd have a 10-second micro break, is what they called it, and then 10 more seconds to practice, 10-second micro break. What you're looking at on the graph here is their progress over the course of the study. If you see the little squiggles, that's the 10-second practice session. The gap between the little squiggles is their 10-second micro break. Everybody understand what you're looking at on the graph? Okay. If you look at the end of any squiggle and the start of the next squiggle after the gap, you can see that they're always at a higher level after the micro break. Can everybody see that? If you compare any two squiggles, actually, you see that pattern all the way through. And in fact, when the researchers analyzed the data from this study, they found that the vast majority of the improvement people made was attributable to the breaks, not the practice session itself, which is very, very weird, right? Part of what was going on is they had people hooked up to a brain scanner, and they found that during that 10-second break, the brain was replaying what they were practicing 20 times faster, which is just, isn't that so cool? The brain did a super fast-forward replay of what they had been working on during the break. So the brain's not doing nothing. The brain's actually doing a lot when you're taking a break. And when they came back, they were at a higher level. So all of the research on breaks, when I started looking into it many years ago, my biggest question was, why, right? Why is this? Clearly breaks are important. Clearly breaks work. Why? So part of the reason why breaks work is this 20 times faster thing that we just talked about, right? That the brain continues to work on it. Another thing that the brain does during breaks is it does reconstruction on itself. In order for us to learn anything, in order for us to get better at anything, the brain has to make actual physical changes to itself. And without physical changes, there's no learning that has happened, there's no improvement that has happened. And that physical changing that the brain has to do, it can really only do that when you're taking a break. So I have two analogies that help people wrap their mind around this, because I know this is a very strange thing to consider, right? That when you're sitting on your couch with your cat, that's when you're getting the most progress. So My first analogy is road construction. If you have a road that's filled with potholes and the city decides to come in and fix it, they have to shut down the road, right? You can't have people driving on the road when you're trying to fix it. So they shut down the road, repave the road, and then when they open it back up, it's a much better driving experience for you. It's the same thing with your brain. You can't be using your brain if your brain has to do physical reconstruction on itself. It needs you to take a break. The brain comes in, does what it has to do, just like the city, and then when you come back after taking a break, you're at a higher level of skill. So that's the first analogy. The second analogy is that of physical strength training. If any of you have ever tried to lift weights or do push-ups or do something to increase your strength, you know that you don't actually get stronger during the workout itself. You create micro tears in your muscles, and your muscles then repair themselves while you're taking a break, and it repairs the muscles stronger. So anybody that's ever done any strength training knows the importance of rest days, right? You don't do leg day 2 days in a row because your legs need time to recover. It's exactly the same thing in our brains. You don't create micro tears in your brain while you're practicing, but you do give your brain input, and your brain does something with that input while you're taking a break. So breaks are really, really critical for learning. So now, some practical application for how you can actually use this. So the first is within a practice session, take lots of micro breaks, 10 to 15 second little breaks, just like in that last study that we looked at, to give your brain a chance to process. I think often as musicians, we feel like if we're not actively playing, we're wasting our time, right? But that is the opposite of what is true. It's very weird to take micro breaks when you're not used to it. But once you get used to it, you can feel how much better it is, how much faster you learn, and how much better you retain the information. So I practice in 30-minute segments of time, and I would say if I added up all the micro breaks I take, probably 10 to 15 minutes of that is break. I take lots and lots and lots of micro breaks. People often ask, well, what do I do during my micro break? Get a sip of water. I always practice in front of a window, so I look out on the street and I see what's going on with the animals or my neighbors out there. But you want to give your brain a chance to space out. We tend to think that it's bad to space out. Stop daydreaming. Don't do that. You need to be paying attention. Our brains need to space out. Our brains need to daydream. So just allow your mind to wander for 10 to 15 minutes and then come back and practice a little bit more. So that's the first thing. Second is come back to the same thing multiple times in a practice session. We tend to practice by working on one thing. This was that second question, right? Work on one thing, we work on it till we've mastered it, and then we go work on other stuff, and we don't think about that first thing again, because we're done. We've already practiced it. But you will get much more out of your time if you practice something for a little bit, then go work on some other things, then come back and practice that first thing again, go work on some other things, come back and practice that first thing again. So you take a break, and then you come back. It's amazing what a difference that makes in your ability to retain what you practiced. Next, come back to the same thing several times throughout the day. So the way that I used to practice before I learned about this is I would have one practice session devoted to each piece I was working on. So maybe I would practice Bach for half an hour in the morning, and then I would practice Brahms for the next half hour, or something like that. Each block was devoted to a different piece of music. Now, it looks much more chaotic, but I get much more out of my time, because maybe I'll practice a little bit of Bach in the morning, and then when I practice again in the afternoon, I come back and I practice Bach again, and then when I practice again in the evening, I practice Bach again. So I'm doing a little bit of everything mixed up throughout the day so that I get breaks and I get to come back. And again, it's amazing how much better you are able to remember things when you practice in that way. Once you get really good at something, the better you get at something, the longer you want your breaks to be. This is one that often feels scary to people, that once they can play something well, the best thing you can do is to stop practicing it and leave it alone for several days or several weeks. Most people feel like, okay, I have it, I have to maintain it. But actually, you'll maintain it better if you take long amounts of time off. One of the first things that was discovered about the power of breaks is something called the forgetting curve. And basically, when you get better at something, it takes longer for you to forget it. And if you remind your brain of something right before it forgets, it helps solidify it in your mind better than if you remind your brain too soon. The analogy I often give for this is if you go to a dinner party and you meet someone new, they introduce themselves and they walk away and you've already forgotten their name, right? This happens to all of us and you're like, oh my gosh, what is that person's name? If though, 15 minutes later, you heard them introduce themselves to someone else, you'd be like, oh, Margaret, okay. And it would be in your brain forever because you had a chance to forget and now you're reminded. But if Margaret introduced themselves to you and then Margaret introduced themselves to your spouse and then left, you would still forget, right? Because it had been too close in time, you didn't have a chance to forget first. So anything that you're currently working on that you feel like, oh, I can play this well, how do I retain this? Stop practicing it for a couple days or a couple weeks. When you come back and you have to remind yourself of it, it will stick in your memory better. And then finally, we didn't really get to talk about sleep today, but sleep is the ultimate break. So getting enough sleep, everybody's yawning, getting enough sleep is really important. Enough sleep is defined as 7 to 9 hours a night for adults. The brain does all sorts of stuff while we're sleeping to help solidify and consolidate our learning. So it's really, really important to make sure that you're getting enough sleep. Last thing I'm going to say about breaks before we turn to our next topic is how you should schedule your practicing. So you never want to practice for more than 25 to 30 minutes without at least a 5-minute break. Anyone who's heard of the Pomodoro technique, this probably sounds familiar because that's how it works. This is both for our brains and for our bodies. This is what doctors who study musicians and musicians' injuries, this is what they found is optimal for our bodies as well. So after every 25 to 30 minutes, you want to take at least a 5-minute break. And then after every hour to an hour and a half, with breaks every 30 minutes, you want to take an hour and a half to a 2-hour break. So this is especially eye-opening for conservatory students who think they should be practicing for 3 hours at a stretch without a break. But this is often much less time than people are used to practicing before they take a break. I have been practicing on this schedule since I was 15. So I did my entire education and my entire professional life using this schedule because I got very injured when I was 15 and I had to. All of my students who have switched to this schedule are astounded at how much more productive their practicing is. So if you're not practicing on this schedule, if you practice, for instance, for a whole hour before you take a break, put a 5-minute break in the middle. If you're someone that practices for 2-3 hours at a stretch, don't do that anymore. You're burning your brain out. Take more breaks and you will learn better and faster. All right, let's switch now to talk about something called blocked versus random practice. You'll see that this is very closely related to what we were just discussing. Random practice I like to think of as a special kind of taking breaks, as you'll see. So before we get into this research, I want to make sure we have a common vocabulary, so I'm going to define our terms here. So an example of blocked practice, and these are viola orchestra excerpts, but it doesn't matter what they are. An example of blocked practice would be Don Juan for 30 minutes, Mendelssohn Scherzo for 30 minutes, Beethoven 5 second movement for 30 minutes. So you do each thing for a block of 30 minutes before moving on. I've already kind of discussed that's how I used to practice, and it doesn't work as well. An example of random practice would be Don Juan for 10 minutes, Beethoven for 10 minutes, Mendelssohn for 10 minutes, Beethoven for 10 minutes, Mendelssohn for 10 minutes, Don Juan for 10 minutes. You guys get the idea. In the end, you've done everything for 30 minutes total, but it's 10 minutes at a time, all mixed up. On the face of it, if you didn't know anything about breaks, this would probably look like a terrible idea, right? It would seem extremely chaotic and unfocused. Just pick one thing and stick with that. Don't keep switching around. But from our conversation on breaks, you can probably see why this is a good idea, right? While you're practicing Mendelssohn and Beethoven, you're taking a break from Don Juan, and then you come back. The research on random practice looks at these two types of practice, block versus random, in terms of performance skill and how well people perform. And so that's how I'm mostly going to talk about it, that this is mostly looked at in the research in terms of which one results in better performance. And that's something that we care a lot about as musicians, right? That when we get up to play in front of somebody, we want to do our best. So the first study that I'm going to share with you on this was done on baseball players. The goal was to improve their batting average, so their ability to hit balls. They broke them into two groups, as you can see. The blocked practice group was given 45 total pitches in blocks of 15. So they'd get a 15 fastballs, then 15 curveballs, then 15 change-up pitches, and they had to hit as many as they could. The random practice group also got 45 total pitches, but the order was completely randomized. They had no idea what was coming at them. So maybe they'd get a fastball, then 3 curveballs, then a change-up pitch, then 5 more fastballs. They had no idea, and they had to just adjust in the moment. While they were practicing, it looked like the block practice group was doing better, which makes sense, right? They knew exactly what was coming. They just had hit the same thing over and over. But when they brought the baseball players back 2 days later for a performance in musician terminology, they found that while the blocked practice group had made a 25% improvement, the random practice group had made a 57% improvement, which is obviously a lot more improvement. I have a graph of this for you. So where it says acquisition on the bottom there, that is the practice session. And you can see that the white triangles, that's the blocked practice group, are doing better than the random practice group, the black squares. Where it says transfer test over on the side of the graph on the bottom, that is the performance. And you can see the two groups switch, right? Everybody see that? Now the random practice group is on top and they are doing better. So this is like the studies on taking breaks. This is just one study of many that finds the same thing. I want to share a study with you on musicians because that's what we are, right? And it's nice to see that, yes, this will work for us too. So the study on musicians was done on pianists, and they had a group of professional pianists come into the lab to learn a series of short pieces that had been composed specifically for the experiment. So nobody could have known them ahead of time. All of the pianists learned all of the pieces. Some of them they learned using a blocked practice method. Some of them they learned using a random practice method, which the experimenters controlled. So just like the baseball players, while they were practicing, it looked like they were doing better on the pieces that they were learning using a blocked practice method. But then just like the baseball players, they brought them back 2 days later and they had to play a concert of all these pieces that they had learned. And they found that the pieces that they had learned using a random practice method, they performed much more successfully. So same exact result as the baseball players. My favorite part of the piano study is after the concert was over, they interviewed all the pianists and they said, what do you think is better, blocked or random practice? And all the pianists said, oh, definitely blocked practice. And I was like, wait, what? Like, they could see for themselves that the random practice produced a better concert. Like, why in the world did they think that block practice is better? But actually, that result, thinking that block practice is better, even when it's very clearly not, that is so common that psychologists have given it a name. They call it the illusion of mastery. And I love that because if you only do blocked practice, it gives you the illusion that you've mastered it, but you haven't. It's an illusion. So I want you to raise your hand if you've ever had this experience I'm about to describe. You practice really well. You feel like, okay, yes, I can play this. I sound great. You go to your lesson, you play for your teacher, and it's a disaster. And you say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I promise I practiced. This sounded so much better yesterday at home. I don't know what's going on. How many people have had that? Yes, every single person in the room, right? Me too. And it's baffling. It's really frustrating and it's embarrassing, but it's baffling, right? Because you did sound good yesterday. Why do you suddenly not even know your own name when you have to play in front of your teacher, right? So if you think about what most people typically do when they practice is you work on one thing and you work out all the bugs and you break it down, you do it at different tempos and you gradually work it up. And after you've done it a bunch of times, then at the end of your practice session, you're like, okay, I got it. Like now it feels really good. That is not typically how a lesson looks. You don't typically go into your lesson, try it out a bunch of times, work out the bugs, and then at the end of your lesson you say to your teacher, okay, now you can listen to me, now I sound good, right? That's not really how it goes. Usually you go into your lesson and you just play. That, just playing for your teacher, just right off the bat like that, that's a much different skill for your brain. That's a much more difficult skill for your brain. And if you're asking your brain to do that for the very first time, in front of your teacher, like your poor brain never got to practice the skills it needs. How in the world is it supposed to do well, right, in that situation? And so looked at it in that way, it makes a lot more sense why that experience is so common, right? Because we tend not to practice the skills that we actually need when we have to just play a piece through like you do for your teacher. And that's where random practicing comes in. So if you think about my example, I'll go back to this slide. There we go. Of random practice where it's all mixed up. You're working on a number of skills when you're switching between things. One of them is the skill of flexibility, right? You've been working on Beethoven, now you suddenly have to switch to Mendelssohn. Wait, how do I play that again? Oh, right, and you have to kind of switch your mindset. When you play music, the music just keeps going, right? And so you have to constantly be switching your mindset to remember, how do I play this section? Oh yeah, that's right, okay. And your brain has to have that flexibility to just play through. So that's a skill that it works on. Similarly, when you switch between things and you've been working on one thing for a while and then you have to come back to something else, you remind your brain, oh right, that's how we do this. And those more frequent reminders, just like the dinner party conversation, right, help solidify it in your brain. And so when we do random practice, we're working much more on the skills that we actually need to perform a piece. So let me go back to where we were with our slides. Okay, last study that I want to share with you before I give you some practical information about how to use this. This is a study, this last one, that put people in a brain scanner and had them do random or blocked practicing and then performing and see what is their brain doing. So this is a series of graphs looking at 3 different parts of the brain. That's the A, B, C in the graph. It doesn't matter what these parts are, just 3 different areas that were involved in the skills that the people had to do. I don't know if you can read it, but where it says practice on the left-hand side, the first column says repetitive practice. Can you guys see it, or is it too small? You can see it? Okay. But it's the smaller bar, right? And so that is the brain activation when people are doing repetitive or blocked practice. The bar next to it, that's much, much taller, that's how much brain activation there is when people are doing random or interleaved practice. Those 2 words are synonyms here. And so you can see the bar is like twice as large. Everybody see that, right? And so what that means is when you're doing random practice, the brain is working a lot harder, which makes sense. If you're constantly switching between things, that's really hard for your brain. So your brain's working a lot harder when you're doing random practice. Now if you look at the graph where it says retention on the right-hand side, retention always means performance in these studies. This is people performing things they learned either using block practice or random practice. So the first bar in the retention column is the brain activation when people perform what they learned using blocked practice. You can see that that bar is bigger than the one next to it. The one next to it is the brain activation when people perform things that they learned using random practice. It's a little teeny tiny bar. Everybody see that? That it's really small? What that means is when you do random practice, your brain works really hard in the practice room, and then when you have to go perform, it's so easy that your brain hardly has to do anything at all. When the brain does something that's very easy for it, you see very minimal brain activation because it's really easy. For instance, if you put a professional pianist in a brain scanner and you put a beginner pianist in a brain scanner and you have them both play scales or something like that, the professional pianist, their brain is hardly doing anything at all because it's so easy for them, whereas the beginner, their brain is kind of going crazy because it's much harder. So when you perform, you want to make it as easy as possible for your brain, right? So that you're not worried about how to play it, so you can, if you're playing with other people, you can pay attention to them. So when you do random practice, that's exactly what you get. You make it very, very easy for your brain when you're performing. This is also in graph form the illusion of mastery, right? When you're doing blocked practice, your brain isn't activated as much, and so it feels like, oh yeah, I have this, this is easy. No, you don't. You have an illusion that you've mastered it, that you only find out when you go to performance. So I saw this study, and I was like, oh gosh, I'm really shooting myself in the foot by only doing block practice, because I'm making it harder for my brain than it otherwise would have to be by only doing block practice. I would rather it be really hard for my brain in the practice room, and then I get on stage and it feels nice and easy. So hopefully I've convinced you that this is worth trying. So let me give you some suggestions for how to use this. This first suggestion is looking at preparing you for performing in terms of practicing performance readiness. So to do this, I make a list of my hard spots. I have some examples on the screen. And I always want my list to have at least 5 different spots, but no more than like 10 or so, because it will take too long if there's more than 10. So I make a list of my hard spots, and then I perform my first spot as if it's a concert, no stopping, no matter what. If it's good, it gets a tick mark on the list. If it's not good, too bad, I just have to go on, it doesn't get a tick mark, oh well. Then I go on to my second spot, I perform it. If it's good, it gets a tick mark. If it's not good, no tick mark, just go on. So you go through your whole list like this, hopefully you get a tick mark on all the spots. Once you get through your list, you go back to the beginning and you play your first spot again. If it's good, it gets another tick mark. If it's not good, I think I made the third one not good. Yeah, if it's not good, not only do you not get a tick mark, but you lose any tick marks that you earned for that spot. And then you just have to go on. So the goal with this exercise as you go through is 5 tick marks per spot. So you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this does a number of things. First, it shows you very clearly what you can play and what you can't, right? And I would much rather find out that I can't play something very well in the privacy of my own practice room than on stage in front of an audience. Second, the things that you can get 5 tick marks on, it gives you a lot of confidence that, like, yes, I can just play this on the spot, and then you don't worry as much when you get on stage. It also works on that skill of flexibility, like we were talking about, right, because you're constantly switching between things. And it works on the skill of letting things go if you mess up, right? If I put in the example of the third one, I lost my tick mark, it's very easy when you're performing to make a mistake and then have that start to spiral. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, I just messed that up, and then you start messing up more and more things. It's a skill to learn to let go of a mistake and just focus on what's coming up next. And so this works on that too. If I messed up that third one, okay, it's in the past. Now I have to focus on the fourth one, and that's it. So this exercise works very, very well. It's frustrating at first if you're used to the illusion of mastery, but it's totally worth it. Oops, sorry, I went too far. You got to see my panda there early. A couple other ideas for using this idea of random practice. The first one on there I call time-constrained interleaf practice or random practice. Again, those two words are synonyms. For this, I pick 3 spots that I want to work on, and I use an interval timer. That's a screenshot of my interval timer app. An interval timer allows you to set a timer to go off repeatedly rather than just once. So I will put on a 3-minute timer, and I will come up with an order of doing my 3 spots, of switching between them, so that I hit every spot 3 times in my practice session. So maybe my order is 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, let's just say. So I start practicing my first spot, timer goes off after 3 minutes, I switch to my second spot, and so on. What this does is a number of things. One, you really have to be very focused if you only have 3 minutes, right? So you can't practice mindlessly, you can't have your mind wandering and not really paying attention to what you're doing. So it forces you to be really efficient and focused with your time. For people that tend to get stuck on one thing and have trouble moving on, it forces you to move on. Again, it practices that skill of flexibility because you're constantly switching between things. And it gives you breaks in there, right? While you're practicing spots 2 and 3, you get a break from spot number 1, for instance, and then you come back. People typically have 2 reactions to this. Either, ooh, that sounds really fun, I want to try that. Or, no, absolutely not, that sounds terrible, I do not want to do that. If you are in the no, absolutely not camp, I encourage you to try it just once. It only takes 27 minutes. It's only 27 minutes out of your life. I think you'll be surprised at how well it works. In my class on practicing that I teach at New England Conservatory, some of our classes are actually on Zoom, so every student can be in their own practice room on mute, and I can lead them through a practice session. And I always do this with the students in one of our online practice sessions. And the reaction from the students is always, okay, wow, I thought that was going to be terrible, but actually I got more done in those 27 minutes than in my entire practice day yesterday. So it's really well worth trying. If you hate it, you never have to try it again, but I recommend you try it just once. It's not going to hurt you. A couple other ideas for testing performance readiness. For these, I also use an interval timer. And the first one, I will pick one section that I want to make sure sounds really good. Maybe it's the opening of my concert. I will practice something completely different, and I'll set my interval timer to go off every 5 to 7 minutes. When the timer goes off, I stop what I'm practicing. I perform the opening of my concert just like it's a concert, no stopping no matter what, and then I go back to what I was practicing before. Timer goes off again, I perform the opening of my concert. So again, it simulates, this is what it's going to feel like to just play it on the spot to see if I can do that. Where it says random order there, I will also divide my piece into sections, assign each section a number. And then when the interval timer goes off, instead of playing just one section, I will use a random number generator to tell me which section to perform. It says section number 5, okay, I have to perform section number 5. And so that's also a great test. These also work really well for testing memory, if you're memorizing something and you want to test your memory. So the takeaway from this part of the presentation about both breaks and random practice is 1, breaks are really powerful, but 2, if you want to perform well, you have to give your brain a chance to practice the skills that it's going to need in the performance situation. Otherwise, why would your brain know how to do it? You haven't given it a chance to practice those actual skills. Okay, last topic for today is mental practice. So the information that I'm going to share with you comes from a study that was done on non-musicians who had never played any instrument ever, and they had to play this on the piano. I assume people can read it, just a little scale up and down, at quarter note equals 60. So they broke the people into 3 groups. Group 1 had to practice just that for 2 hours a day. Can you imagine? 2 hours a day for 5 days. Clearly they knew nothing about taking breaks and interleaved practice. Group 2 had to practice that 2 hours a day for 5 days, mental practice only. So what that means is they had to imagine themselves playing it without actually doing it. They just had to sit there still and like imagine their fingers moving. And then group 3, they were the lucky ones, the control group, they didn't practice. They didn't do anything. So the only time groups 2 and 3 got to actually practice was for or actually play the piano, was for 2 seconds at the end of each day when the experimenters tested how well they were doing. So what did they find? They found that the control group did not practice, did not get better. So if you want to get better, you need to practice. Thank you, science. Okay, the physical practice group, the line with the solid circles, they were perfect. After 5 days, which good, they better be, they practiced that thing for 10 hours. The mental practice group, which is the open circles, after 5 days, they were where the physical practice group was approximately after 3 days. Can everybody see that? The 5-day data point versus the 3-day data point on the physical practice group, which is pretty impressive. Remember, they've never played any instrument ever. They're just learning how to do this by imagining it. So the experimenters told the mental practice people, okay, go into a practice room, actually practice on a piano for 2 hours, come back when you're done, and we'll test you again. And when they came back, they were also perfect. That, however, is not what blew my mind about this study. What blew my mind is something else they tested that I haven't told you about yet. So around the time this study came out, a different study came out that found that the part of the brain that controls the left hand on string players, that's the hand that we use on the instrument, the part of the brain that controls the left hand on string players is bigger than that same part of the brain in the general population, and versus the part of the brain that controls the right hand fingers, the ones that we use on the bow. We now know that any body part you use intensively, the way that string players use our left-hand fingers, the part of the brain that controls that body part gets bigger. So for any pianists here, it's both sides because you use both hands equally. You may have seen videos on YouTube of people who play piano with their feet. So for those people, the toe area is bigger. But at any rate, based on that research, in this mental practice study, they hypothesized that the part of the brain that controlled the fingers in the physical practice group would get bigger over the course of the study. The question was, would anything happen with the mental practicers? So what did they find? So the control group did not practice, did not get better, their brains didn't change. No surprise there. In the physical practice group, they found exactly what they thought. So obviously this isn't a picture of a brain, it's just a diagram, but you can see that this part of the brain that they're measuring gets bigger and bigger and bigger over the 5 days. The thing that blew my mind about this study is what they found in the mental practicers. So the people that mental practiced, the part of the brain that controlled the fingers got bigger to almost the exact same extent as the physical practice group. Think about that for just a sec. Those people changed the actual physical structure of their brain just by thinking about it. You can't do that out in the world. I can't sit here and be like, you know, this room is really beautiful, but you know what would make it really cool is if the walls were multicolored and then suddenly all the colors change on the wall. Or if I decided I wanted this room to be a different size and I just thought about it and all of the walls started to move around. You cannot do that, right? You cannot change the physical anything in the world just by thinking about it. But you can change the actual physical structure of your brain with your brain, which is just amazing. That's like a superpower, right? So part of the reason this works is when you mental practice, you are using the same parts of your brain in almost the exact same ways as when you physically practice your instrument. I say almost because if it was identical, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between actually playing and imagining something, and that would be quite weird, I would think. So what do I mean by mental practice? What I mean by mental practice is imagining everything that you need to be aware of when you actually play your instrument in terms of what you want it to sound like and what should it feel like. So all the sound-based things, can you hear the pitches? Can you hear the quality of sound? Can you hear the dynamics? If you play an instrument that uses vibrato, can you hear the vibrato you want? And then on the physical side of things, for me as a string player, can I feel which finger or fingers I'm using to play any given note? What string am I on? What position am I in? What's the spacing between my fingers? With my bow, feeling, am I going up bow or down bow? What string am I on? What part of the bow am I in? All of the physical things, physical posture, anything that you need to be aware of when you play, you want to try to imagine in your mind. And you want to make sure you can imagine yourself doing it correctly, which is surprisingly difficult. If you can't do something correctly on the instrument, you're going to have a really hard time imagining it correctly. But if you're able to imagine it correctly, if you're able to fix it in your mind, it will fix it on the instrument. So you can use this anytime you want to practice, and you can't if you are in an airplane, or it's late at night and people are sleeping, or you're injured or something, you can mental practice. The way that I use this most frequently, although I have spent countless hours in my life mental practicing on airplanes, I am constantly going back and forth between mental practice and physical practice. So this morning, before I drove down here from Boston, I was practicing. And every time whatever I've decided to practice for that day, I start by doing it in my mind and seeing, can I hear this the way I want? And can I feel myself playing it? And can I feel that it's how I want it to be? And then I try it on my instrument. My instrument gives me information, and then I put it back in my mind. So it's this constant back and forth between doing it and imagining it. The research on mental practice has found that the combination of mental and physical practice together is far better than either one on its own. Most people don't do exclusively mental practice, but most people do exclusively physical practice, right? But people that do both make much more improvement than people that only do one or the other. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today. If you've never mental practiced, I highly recommend trying it out. It takes practice to mental practice, so if it's hard for you to imagine things, that's okay. It's a skill. You'll get better at it. And the more you try to imagine things clearly, the clearer it will get in your mind. So that is the end. Thank you so much for coming today.